Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, wherever it is that you are tuning in from, and a very happy Pride to all of us. Thank you so much for being here with us as we have this discussion on queer, trans, and gender expansive joy in the workplace. I know that Chris Angel and I have been feeling pretty joyful and laughing through a lot this morning, and so I'm really excited to be here together. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rex Wilde. I use they and them pronouns, and I'm the founder of Rex Wilde Consulting, where I work with organizations and companies on bolstering their TGX or trans and gender expansive inclusion initiatives through things like educational training as well as direct consulting. I'm very happy to be here with my friend and colleague, Chris Angel Murphy, as we move into this discussion. And so, Chris Angel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I love it. Oh my gosh, we're like on a podcast or a live show. I appreciate this. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's been a lot of fun over the past day. I got to chat with some folks at Spectrum yesterday on Spectrum News One, which was really fun. And then tomorrow I'm looking forward to going to Santa Monica Pride, and I'm actually performing, and I'm doing a drag performance for the first time ever. So there's a lot of joy happening on this end of the country.
Are we allowed slash is it appropriate to learn what your drag name is?
I actually haven't come up with one yet. So
Oh
I
no.
know. So it's something that is in creation right now. But tomorrow, even if not in name, I will be there in persona.
There you go. I love it. Well, that's freaking exciting. Yeah, as Rex mentioned, my first name is Chris Angel, but my full name is Chris Angel Murphy, and my pronouns are they, them. And I'm also an LGBTQ plus speaker, trainer, and consultant. I'm also a podcaster of the podcast called Allyship is a Verb, and I recognize some of the folks here as actually having been on the podcast. So hello. Lovely to have you here. Love when the worlds collide like that. But yeah, we're here today to have a conversation because when we're thinking about times like Pride Month, there is a lot of celebration. And maybe for any of you in the audience today, if this is your first Pride, happy Pride. I also just want to take a moment to say there's no right or wrong way to do that. It was a message I tried to send out a lot last year, just because I think that, there can be a lot of overwhelm of figuring out which events to go to or whether to not do that or maybe stay in and celebrate in a different way or so however you want to celebrate Pride this year, just do it in a way that really honors you and feels good to you and also feels safe to you. I'll just say that piece. But yeah, Rex, why are we having this conversation today?
That is a great question. I think that there are a lot of reasons to have this conversation. In the current political climate that we're in, right? We have over 500 anti-LGBTQ bills that have been introduced in state legislatures just this year alone. And I think that's leaving a lot of people that are either in the greater LGBTQ plus community or who are supporters of the LGBTQ plus community to ask, should we even be celebrating Pride, right? And how do we find joy in a moment like this? And I think that when we look at some folks' work around these issues, for example, Adrienne Maree Brown, I think has such an incredible perspective on what we need to see when we are in movements of justice and liberation around the LGBTQ plus community, but also marginalized communities in general. And one of the things that she talks about in the book Pleasure Activism is this idea that in order for us to create the futures that we want to see, we actually have to start by living in them now. And so if we want to see a future that encompasses and embodies queer joy, we actually have an opportunity to live that out in the best way possible now. And one of the quotes that I love is, there is no way to repress pleasure and expect liberation, satisfaction, or joy. So basically by saying, by repressing our joy, that doesn't actually lead to liberation. What leads to liberation is living in our joy in the present. And so for me, I think that's one of the really important reasons about why we're having this conversation today and why we're leaning into this understanding of what queer joy is.
Absolutely. So, yeah, some of the things we wanted to talk about and start with is just what is queer joy, and then also go into what is gender euphoria. So, Rex, for you, and I know you elaborated on it a little bit, but what is queer joy? Like, how are we defining queer within this conversation, especially for folks who are maybe not part of the LGBTQ plus community and may know of some of the history of the word or term queer, and that it's historically and sometimes still to this day carries heavy negative connotation. So yeah, could you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think we can start out just kind of defining the term queer, since I know that that can be nuanced for a lot of people. And there are a lot of people who are questioning, like, wait, why are we even using this term in the first place? And so when we're talking about the term queer at this point in the world is used in a variety of different ways for people throughout the LGBTQ plus community. Some people use it as a term to identify their sexual orientation. For some people, it actually helps to define their gender identity or their gender expression. For others, it can just be an identity term that really encompasses their wholeness as a person, how they live in the world and how they see the world. And so there are many different ways that the term queer is used on an individual level, but then also it's often used collectively when referencing, for example, the greater LGBTQ plus community. You may hear people like what some of us, or me and Chris Angel, have been even saying today, is the queer community, right? We're really referencing the greater LGBTQ plus community. Now, with that, we've seen a reclamation of this word over the past 20 years or so because it has historically been used as a slur. And so there are many folks who, when they hear the term queer, think, oh my gosh, wait, why are you saying this bad word, right? When in reality, we have seen this reclamation movement over the past 20 years or so, where folks are actually using this as an identity term, as a term of empowerment, and taking back that word in order for us to define it for ourselves. And so when we're thinking about this idea of queerness, and then when we're thinking about this idea of queer joy, that's also something that is individually defined and collectively defined that we get to define for ourselves. And so when I'm thinking about the idea of queer joy, I'm thinking about what does it mean to live as authentically as possible and to have other people validate, love, and uplift that experience. And so being able for me to walk into a room, for example, and to have people who are uplifting my non-binary and my trans identity and who are saying, hey, you are welcome and you belong here. And we celebrate your identity, right? And so being able to go into places, for example, where my pronouns are immediately being understood and validated gives just one short example of that. But how about for you, Chris Angel? What comes up when you think about queer joy for yourself?
I think lately, how I've been thinking about it is when I use the term neuroqueer, and I think that may be new to a lot of folks. And for me, it's talking and speaking to this intersection of my neurodivergence and my queerness more broadly, and that intersection is so important to me. And especially when I'm able to be in spaces where I'm at that intersection with other folks, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. I don't have to compartmentalize who I am, and I can unmask, meaning I don't have to hide my ADHD. I don't have to hide my autism. I don't have to hide that I'm, moving about the world in a way that's very different from what people may expect or know. And it's celebrated in those kinds of spaces. And so, like, those are some of my favorite people to also just, be in community with, have as friends, have as family. And it's become very important to me. And I also just mentioned that because, number one, some of you may be neurodivergent. So this is your reminder to drink some water. Please stay hydrated. It's getting to be hot. We need to stay cool and not have headaches and get sick. And also, there is a significant overlap between the two communities. For example, folks who are autistic, there's been the data to prove that they're more likely to be gender expansive in some way, for example. So just knowing that I'm a part of these two worlds and how they're intersecting is very important to me, and I have a lot of pride in that. So yes, now that I understand I'm part of these two communities and I have so many wonderful people also at those similar intersections, that is absolutely queer joy to me, or even neuroqueer joy, I guess, to be more specific. So I think we did a good job of talking through that. What about gender euphoria, Rex?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was just about to say, I feel like when I'm hearing you talking about being neuroqueer, I'm also hearing this idea of gender euphoria coming out of like being able to define that term for yourself. And I'm hearing the euphoria that comes from being able to use this identity term and know that when those intersections are something that is validated, that is, acknowledged, that sounds like it's bringing a level of gender euphoria to you. And so when we're talking about this term, because I'm sure there are many people who might not know the term gender euphoria, right? A lot of people in relation to trans and gender expansive folks are used to hearing about gender dysphoria, which is historically what has been talked about in the greater trans, non-binary, and gender expansive community, in part because of the medicalization of trans folks and their need to access medical care through diagnoses. And so in the medical community, in order for doctors to provide gender affirming care, initially they had to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria to say, oh, there is, some type of, there's something going on that we need to address, right? And so while that came from the medical community, the reality is it's kind of rippled into how people tend to see trans, non-binary, and gender expansive folks, which is, oh, you must have gender dysphoria. You must think there's something wrong with you, right? You must think there's something wrong with your body. You must want to change something. And it's interesting because for me and of myself, I never had this experience where I was looking at my body and thinking that something was wrong with it as a trans person and as a non-binary person. However, once I started shifting my gender expression and wearing clothes that, felt more authentic for me, I did start experiencing what is gender euphoria, which is then when I looked at myself, I just experienced so much elation, so much, many experiences of, oh my God, this is right. Like, this is just who I am. And so when we're talking about gender euphoria, we're talking about the experience of increased happiness, validation, and joy that comes from being able to express yourself in an authentic way with regard to your gender.
Yeah, and I would say a way that's come up for me is, I mean, I've only more recently discovered that I'm ADHD and autistic, and I'm still learning about what that means for me. And what's actually really helped a lot is, you know, for most of my life, I've really struggled to find the language to explain my experience. And so sometimes people gave me that language with or without consent. So starting in my childhood, being labeled a tomboy, and I proudly was so, because I was like, oh, okay, if this is who I am and it allows me to mess with the, gender a little bit, then great. If I have the freedom to be who I am in this label and this everyone's like looking at me and saying this is good, then cool. Except that, by the time I got to middle school, people were like, oh, that's not cute. You're still doing that. We were hoping you'd grow out of it. Right. And then I was like, wait, we were celebrating this before. What changed all of a sudden in middle school? And I got really confused about that. So it would take some time for me to figure out gender stuff, and I'm still figuring it out. However, present day, I use the term non-binary to describe my experience. And for me, it just gives me that freedom to show up how I want. However, what's been important is figuring out that I'm autistic and ADHD can also come with a bunch of sensory needs. And now I can much better explain my experience, because when I've made decisions talking about medical care, like Rex was just speaking through, when I look back, every decision I've made and continue to make is through my sensory experiences. So when I think about gender euphoria, yeah, it's also a really great gender affirming haircut or beard trim. And it's also the clothing I wear. Like I chose this shirt because the fabric is so soft, like it gives me a good sensory experience. I'm thinking, I imagine many of us here right now together have had a shirt or article of clothing on that had like a tag on it, right? And it's just like attacking your neck basically. And you're like, what did I do to deserve this? Right? Like, I don't like that. That's a bad sensory experience, right? So like now that there's so much clothing that's like tagless, things like that, all of that is important because that's part of my gender expression. And so like understanding that my autism and my ADHD are heavily influencing how I want to move around the world, how I want to be experienced by people, has just been everything, because now I feel like I have the full picture finally. And I'm also finding that in talking about it more and more, other folks who happen to also be trans or non-binary or gender expansive in some way are feeling similarly, especially if they're also neurodivergent. So I just love that it's easier versus saying I'm not trying to be a man, I'm not trying to be a woman, but I'm also not trying to be androgynous. I'm just trying to be me. It's just easier to talk about it in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love hearing that, and I think that there are a lot of folks who don't realize the nuances that exist around our own personal experiences of gender euphoria. And the last thing I want to say about gender euphoria too is this isn't something that is specific to trans, non-binary, and gender expansive folks, right? Like non-trans folks experience gender euphoria as well. It's part of the human experience of when we are able to express ourselves in our own gender expression that feels authentic and feels good for us, we can then experience that joy, right? When you put on a great outfit that just makes you feel so you and so seen. And I think that's something that most everyone could relate to. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about our own personal experiences of what can bring us, gender euphoria and joy in general. But when we're talking about the context of the workplace, I know you and I have had this conversation about the different ways that we see queer joy, trans and gender expansive joy happening in workplaces. And so I'm curious, for us to move into talking about what are some of the examples that we see within a workplace context around what joy can look like.
Absolutely. Well, I know that we came up with some examples that an organization could do and also what people on individual levels can do. And I think it's important to explore both of those. So, should we start with those?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Cool. So, one of the ones that we had come up with in terms of thinking about the organization or company itself is having pronouns be normalized throughout the company. And what we mean by that is not just when folks are there and working there, but even thinking about doing like hiring and like the onboarding process so that folks know what are pronouns, what is the importance of that, where all should they exist and be shown within the company, normalizing sharing that so that they're not just happening when we're introducing ourselves to new people, but maybe also on a semi-regular basis that we're taking the time to remind folks. And by the way, my pronouns are they, them, and having it in the email signatures. There's lots of different places where they can exist quickly so that folks can, for example, let's say, Rex and I work at the same place. I'm a newer employee. I don't know what Rex's pronouns are. I can go look first and see, especially if we're using software like Slack or something like that, where they have fields where you can put pronouns. Cool. And then when I'm interacting with Rex, I can make sure I'm honoring them, or if I'm talking about them, because maybe Rex is on my team. So that's one way. You want to share another one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like when we're talking about this in the greater context, right, of like, what are we even talking about when we're saying, queer, trans, and gender expansive joy in the workplace? It's allowing the opportunity for folks not to have to hide who they are, right? To be able to be fully welcome and embraced with their identities. And so by doing things like what you're talking about with making sure pronouns are actually normalized across the entire organization, it's allowing an opportunity for folks to show up fully authentically at every step of the way. And one of the other ways that we can see that happening is through LGBTQ plus affirming policies, procedures, and practices. And that can also include statements. And when those things are being created and being rolled out, making sure that that is actually coming from direct communicated support from top level leadership. Because the reality is that when policies are rolled out, it's a great thing and we love to see them. But when they're coming with direct support and statements of support and inclusion from top level leadership and from C-suites, et cetera, that actually sets a whole entire different precedent for folks to understand, this isn't something that's just coming from HR. This is actually something that we want to see embedded within the culture of our organization. But not only that is, I think that there are a lot of other examples that we can see around that. And some of them, can even be more departmental specific as well. And so, for example, let's say that you've had a team member who has just had their legal name change, right? Being able to do things like, with their consent, give them a congratulations card that says, hey, congrats on your legal name change, right? Or if, perhaps there's a lot of folks in the workplace whose kids are coming out as trans and gender expansive. celebrating when those kids come out and say, hey, congrats, I heard your kid just came out as trans, just wanted to say congratulations to you. But by being able to celebrate those things in both those individual ways, but as well when that's coming from the full department, and that has organizational support, that is actually what's creating a culture where folks are able to fully show up. Chris Angel, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
I think that's great. And I know that we could be here forever. So, in the interest of time, I think I'm going to keep it moving. The only thing I'll say to that is if you're curious about creating that kind of scenario that Rex just stated about if someone's legal name just changed and we want to celebrate them, some ways that you can do that is you can just have maybe like as the manager or supervisor, just have a quick private conversation with that person. Like, hey, the team and I were talking, we want to get you a card or we want to take you to lunch or something to celebrate this. Would that be okay with you? Because I have lots of friends who wish not to be perceived at all and to just go under the radar as their awkward selves. Love you. You know who you are. And some people would love to take a moment to celebrate because I think because of so many things happening, and because of how long it can take, because of barriers of getting access to this kind of stuff, I think taking a moment to celebrate any of these kind of milestones is very important. But yeah, in terms of individual-based allyship, same thing with the card example or taking someone out to lunch. If you know a colleague, a friend, a loved one, and you want to celebrate them in that way, you can ask them like, hey, this is a really big deal. I want to celebrate this with you. Would you want to go here? Like if someone asked me to go to one of my favorite restaurants or something as a way to celebrate it, I'd be like, absolutely. I would love that. But some other ways that this can come up is, like a way I've experienced joy in the workplace before is when I overhear another colleague correcting someone about my name or correcting someone about my pronouns. And I'm not even part of that conversation. I just happen to be within earshot. I can't tell you how good that feels because, sometimes people will act one way to our face, but we have no idea what's happening behind our backs. And so knowing that someone has my back in that way has felt really, really great. Anything else you'd add to that, Rex, in terms of like those individual relationships?
Yeah, the other thing that I've been seeing that and that I have received that has been really helpful is even just getting like an unexpected text from someone, right? So my brother texted me yesterday for June Pride, and I would never expect that from him. And he just said, hey, just hope you have a happy Pride this month. Want you to know I'm thinking of you and I love you. And things like that can go a really, really long way, especially given the current political climate, right? And so having those moments where you're reaching out to someone on your team or a colleague and just saying, hey, I know things are pretty fraught for the LGBTQ plus community right now. And I want you to know I'm thinking about you. If there's anything I can do, I just want you to know that I'm here, right? So being able to communicate on that individual level that you have an awareness that things can feel a little difficult right now for the LGBTQ community, and that you want them to know like, hey, I'm here for you if you ever need someone to chat with. That can also be another great way to just show your support. But then can also, even if they don't follow up on that they know someone's thinking about them. And that can go a long way to just allow people to feel a lot more joyful and know that they are being thought of. Now,
Absolutely.
yeah, I know that we've reached our time and we've gone a little over what we said we did, but I am so, so glad that we've gotten to chat with each other today. And I know that both of us have some pretty exciting things that are coming up. And so, Chris Angel, what have you got going on in your world right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the thing I think I want to talk about the most is my podcast, Allyship is a Verb, was just nominated for its third award this year, which is wild. And so if you're interested in learning more about allyship and hearing it directly from the LGBTQ plus community, I have guests on, and that's where they're from. They're at various intersections, backgrounds, walking or moving about the world in different ways. And so each one also shares an allyship tip that comes directly from them. So if you're looking for more ways to get involved and you want to hear people's stories and hear about what's going on and what some folks are thinking, it's almost like listening to a bunch of queer and just a bunch of queer folks, as if you're like a fly on the wall or something, just having like sometimes really joyful and also sometimes like crunchy conversations. So yeah, it's Allyship is a Verb, and it's available wherever you might listen to podcasts. And then how about you, Rex? I know you have a really exciting event coming up this month.
Yeah, so this past month in May, I actually started what's called a TGX, or Trans and Gender Expansive Inclusion Roundtable. And it is an opportunity each month for DEI, HR, and ERG leaders for us to come together and talk about the current state of TGX, or Trans and Gender Expansive Inclusion in the workplace. So it's a place where we talk about what's going on right now, some of the things that we're seeing in our organizations, troubleshoot some of the issues that folks might be having around having conversations or moving initiatives forward, and really allows an opportunity for all of us to be in community together. So we meet once a month. It's the fourth Wednesday of every month. And this month it's happening on Wednesday, June 28th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And you can find that by going to my website and looking at the events tab. And so I definitely hope we had an incredible conversation last month where we talked about the effective and ineffective strategies that we see within organizations, which was really insightful and helped a lot of people with some next steps in their own organizations. So I definitely welcome folks to come join us this month on June 28th.
Yeah, so Rex's website is shown below, and then you go to the events tab, and that's where you'll find the information about showing up for that. And then if you're interested in going to my website, learning more about me, it's at queer.training. And then, of course, we welcome you adding us, following us on LinkedIn. We'd love to stay in touch with you and just really appreciate all of your comments and really great conversations, including Rex. There were some suggestions for your drag name, so maybe worth diving in there to take a check and see if any of those resonate with you. But just thank you so much. Appreciate everything that's been going on in the chat. Really great conversations and affirmations of what we've shared today. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Yep.
Take care,
Thank you
everyone.
all so much. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.